Center for Healthy Sex in Los Angeles presents a lecture by Marty Simpson, Recovery Treasure Map, Discover the Treasure Map for Recovery Skills Within Every Person.
I'm really happy to be here. This is the first time I've ever presented at Center for Healthy Sex, and I'm looking forward to doing more of that in the future, but I'm really pleased. Douglas and Alex have done such great work in our field, in our community. I'm very proud to be a clinical consultant here, and I'm loving running the partners group. I have such a heart for partners of sex addicts, so I'm loving that work as well. So as we get started here, I'm just curious to get a gauge on you guys. How many of you have some kind of experience with 12-step? Maybe your clients are in 12-step, or you yourself maybe in 12-step, by a show of hands. Okay, lots of you. Okay, great. So I thought I would start with a little bit of 12-step protocol, okay? Hi, I'm Marty.
Hi, Marty. Hi, Marty.
And I am a gratefully recovering user, Thomas Guide user. 15 years. I'm really proud that I have 15 years away from the chaos of flipping pages and memorizing grid patterns, and but I could not have done it without my sponsor. And so I just want to give a big shout out to my sponsor, Waze. I really couldn't have done it. You know, I owe so much to my sponsor, Waze. I wouldn't be here, literally wouldn't be here without him. And you know, the thing is, though, I still struggle with surrender. You know, there are times when Waze will say, you know, you're headed for a hazard, and he'll want to redirect me, you know, and I struggle with that. Like, I don't want to necessarily just give in to the willingness of the program, you know. So I'm just wondering, have any of you guys ever struggled that way, or had your clients struggle that way with their programs? Yeah. And I wonder if you would, in that situation, like to have a tool that would allow your client to lead you into a greater understanding of themselves, compassion for why they became an addict, and would help you identify what their best recovery skills would be. Would you like that, if you had that? Yeah, okay. So that road to recovery with a client can be really long and twisty and confusing. There are times when we as clinicians lose our way. You know, we're not quite sure what will help somebody who's chronically relapsing, say, or something like that. Well, I used to work at another recovery center, Sexual Recovery Institute, and I was there for 4 years. And they had a 2-week male intensive program, very much like the Center for Healthy Sex, 2-week male intensive program, outpatient program. And in that program, we had to get to know our clients very quickly, get to know about their family of origin, their whole history, their patterns of, you know, of acting out behavior, start to draw some connections for them so they started to really understand themselves. You know, try to create a treatment. Well, we did create a treatment plan, try to do meaningful work in 12 days. You know, setting up new boundaries, helping them set up new boundaries, helping them with their relationship issues, this sort of thing, and creating a solid aftercare program, all in 12 days, you know, before we send them back home to the referring therapist and their traumatized partners and all of that. So I was really in need of some kind of a tool that would help me move that work forward in a quick, efficient way. And that's when I came up with this technique that I'm going to show you guys today. So it started because I was also studying voice dialogue, created by Helen Sidra Stone. It's a Jungian work, and it has to do with creating parts of self. Like you identify in the client parts of self, and then you work with those parts of self in the room. So after you identify primary and disowned parts of self, I'll explain that in just a minute, then you actually interview the parts. So if you've got a part of self to say that is a people pleaser, you would actually ask the client, would it be okay if I just talk to your people pleaser? And then you carry out an interview with that people pleaser. It's pretty interesting. It's a little bit of psychodrama that happens in that process. It's very experiential. And so this exercise that I'm going to show you today came out of that work. So just a little bit about voice dialogue, which is also called psychology of the selves. The idea there is that your psyche or your personality is made up of different parts. Each one has its own unique purpose, perspective, and impact on the client. There are the primary parts of self, which are typically the parts that the client already has a pretty good idea about. A lot of these primary selves are the parts that the client is going to identify with, and identify as. And then there's the disowned parts that are the underdeveloped or even hidden parts. You can think shadow side, or stuff that just wasn't nurtured in childhood. And these parts can remain hidden until they explode, or they can often be, projected onto others and cause trouble in relationships, things like that. So in the sex addiction field, this is well known, but I'm not sure how many of you guys have heard that sex addiction is defined as an intimacy disorder. It's becoming more common knowledge, yeah. So intimacy is a big part of the work, and I love this exercise because it really helps the client gain some self-intimacy. So I really see intimacy as happening on these different planes. There's self-intimacy, knowing oneself, having compassion for oneself, that would be involved in self-intimacy. And then the next most complex would be intimacy with others, siblings, friends, colleagues. I would say probably the most complex, or perhaps the most complex, is intimacy with a romantic primary partner. And all three of those types of intimacy relate back to the original intimacy that the client had with their caregiver. And that's attachment theory, right? So I came up with this worksheet. And you guys have one. You have a full-size sheet. But if you don't, let me know. We'll see if we can get them copied off, but you should. And this is basically what I'm calling the recovery treasure map, because we're going to take you through a process of identifying your own parts of self. And I really encourage you to use yourself with this process today. Because I think that there's a different kind of knowing that you have when you have been through the process yourself. I think if you do it with yourself, it'll make more sense when you're actually sitting with a client and walking through their process. So everyone have their sheets in front of them there? So this circle at the bottom represents you. And it represents you as a tiny baby. When you consider a newborn infant, that newborn comes into the world whole, but that infant's brain is going to continue to grow rapidly and change rapidly for the first 25 years of its life. So that's a long gestation process. First the 9 or 10 months in the womb, and then another 25 years outside, right? But when you consider this tiny infant, this infant cannot get its own food or water. It can't provide itself shelter. It can't even move around in its environment. It can't even get away from danger. So we are entirely dependent and entirely defenseless when we come into the world. And we absolutely need our caregivers. We need our caregivers for survival. So we have to connect with our caregivers. If we don't connect with our caregivers, we don't thrive, and we may not even survive, right? So we have to connect with our caregivers no matter who they are, however flawed they are. Because if you took that baby and put him into the woods, he's not going to be able to fend for himself. He's going to need caregivers to take care of him, right? So I want you to look at that worksheet that I've given you there. And that circle, that's you. That represents you as a tiny infant. The diamonds above the circle, and actually I'm going to use the whiteboard for most of this work. So I've recreated that worksheet here, right? So this is you. Hopefully they can still see me. This is you as a tiny, Rick, can you turn the lights on for me, please? Thanks. I think that would be better for the camera, yeah. All right, this is you as a tiny baby, and these diamonds represent your caregivers. Now, I've given you lots of them because I don't know what your situation was in childhood. You may have had mom and dad, you may have had lots of nannies, you may have had foster parents, you may have had a grandma that took care of you, or an aunt or uncle, something like that. So what I want you to do is put an initial or some kind of, some kind of note to yourself about who your caregivers were in those diamonds. And so just remembering as you do that, remembering that the connections you made, say, we're just going to say mom and dad for the purpose of our exercise here, but the connections you made with these people were necessary for your survival, right? So babies have to connect really well with these people, especially with the primary, whoever the primary is, in order to survive. And babies are really adaptable. Babies will make all kinds of pretzel-y twists and turns in order to make that connection happen. So what I want you to consider here and ask yourself is, who did you need to be to connect well with your primary caregiver? And I really want this to be experiential, so to the extent that you feel comfortable doing so, I would love to invite you to, join in the conversation here. So think about that primary caregiver, the person that was mostly responsible for your care, especially as an infant. And you may not know exactly what things were like when you were an infant. You may have to use stories or photos or, that sort of information. I would also have you consider what was going on in your family when you were born. For instance, were they grieving something? Were they involved in a big transition, a big move, or something like that? Just consider those aspects. And consider that primary caregiver. And think about, who did you need to be to really connect with that caregiver? Another way of asking that question is, when you were connected well with that person, what were you doing? What did they give you acknowledgement for? Anyone?
It was a point of pride. I was 6 months old, and we had family visit. And my cousins had pointed out that we had gotten lost in D.C. trying to find a restaurant. And that by the time we found it in 8, they said that you never cried once. And that was a point of pride. And I thought that was normal until I talked it over with my therapist who dealt with trauma, and she said, that is not.
Right. So what I would like you to do is only put on your worksheet what's true for you, but I'm going to put everything that we hear up here so we can kind of do a conglomeration here. So don't cry. Is that how would you use it? How would you say it?
I don't know. It took me about 2.5 years that I saw with her to be able to fully see everything that she pointed out.
Yeah.
And I'm still picking up things where I'm like, oh, that's not normal. Oh, wow. Okay, yeah, I definitely see the disconnect there. Okay, wow.
Well, and I hope in doing this exercise here, you will see that the adaptations that you made for that family system were absolutely normal, in that we are adaptable beings. We do pretzel and change and develop parts of ourselves based on our family system. So you did that beautifully, and maybe it got in the way of functioning later in life or something like that. So the characteristic, you would say, don't cry, or what would be your words?
Self-reliance.
Self-reliance. So I'm going to write that down here. I like to use the words that the client uses, because it has meaning for them, and they choose them for a reason. So I try to use their words, even if it gets a little clunky. Sometimes it does get a little clunky. I'm filling lots of words into the bubble there. Who else can identify something that they, yeah.
My family were new immigrants to the UK from the Caribbean when I was 4.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were very poor, and my mother worked 2 jobs, and my father worked 2 jobs. So what came to my mind was what I had to do to connect with my mum was it was tactile. I got to sleep with her at night because she was out all the time working.
Right.
Sleep. So I very much remember she was busy. We had 5 children. I was the youngest.
Right.
And so I was a little bit lost in chaos.
Of course,
and,
yeah.
But I could have her at night when I slept.
So I'm going to repeat what you said because I'm realizing that you guys aren't mic'd and I am. And so you had immigrated, your family had immigrated, and your parents were working very hard and you were poor. And so your parents were very busy, you were a little lost in chaos. And the way that you could connect with your mother was it was tactile. You got to sleep with her at night. And so it was that touch that allowed you to really connect. Did I get it? Okay. So I'm going to just write down tactile. And I'm curious about maybe even writing down lost in chaos, because I wonder how that played out in your life. Did you then go on to feel lost in chaos in other ways in your life?
Hell yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to write lost in chaos because it was a part of her story, and it was a pretty prominent part. So anyone else? Something? Yes.
Be quiet.
Be quiet. Yes.
Good girl.
Good girl. Now, good girl comes up a lot. That sort of thing comes up a lot. I'm always curious about what that means for you, because I have my own idea about what that means, but I'm always surprised to find out what it means for somebody else. So.
Similar to what you were saying of like not making a fuss, keeping quiet, not challenging the norm, just going with the flow.
So she's saying not making a fuss, being quiet, not don't challenge the norm, go with the flow. I'm going to write don't challenge the norm. And I'm sort of deciding and selecting in this process because I've done it enough, and I think that if you practice it, you get a handle on how to choose what's going to be fruitful in this process. But don't challenge the norm is something I'm really curious about, like how that played out in her life, right? Go with the flow. Let's go with the flow and don't challenge the norm. Kind of the same thing for you. Okay. All right. And we already have be quiet. Otherwise, I would write be quiet up there. Don't make a fuss. Is a fuss, don't be, does that translate into don't be messy?
Yeah, not being messy. Don't cry. Not don't cry as in you're not able to do it, but oh, how good are you because you're not crying? How wonderful are you? You're not crying.
Right.
Our
which
baby is the best. You're not crying.
Which is an implicit memory. Don't cry. Mm-hmm. You got kudos for it, so it felt like a prideful thing. It felt like, oh, great, I don't cry, Mm-hmm. Okay, so I will write that one up because I don't think we have that up here, so don't cry. I always inquire about intense feelings. How was it to be angry in your family? How was it, what happened when you were very upset? How did people react? Was it okay to have those feelings? Because that usually becomes pretty fruitful for this exercise as well. Yes?
So in my family of origin, there were things I had to be to attach, but there were also many things that I learned I couldn't be if I was going to maintain that attachment.
Yes.
So I had to excel, I had to be special, I had to be sociable, I had to maintain a sense of propriety that wasn't necessarily what I wanted. And I had to take care of my mother in particular ways. I was a designated child who gave her massages when she had a migraine, or massaged her feet. And she decided that it was a pattern that continued, because at 11, when my father died, suddenly I then became a surrogate husband of sorts, including sleeping in her bed for a number of months.
Taking care of her needs for comfort. And
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
That was the feeling I had, is this isn't really about my protection, it's about
her.
serving her needs.
Sure. So I'm just going to repeat some of that in case it wasn't heard. That you were really given the message that you needed to excel, you needed to be social, you needed to be special. And that you also took on the role of caregiver for your mother, and especially after your father died when you were young, 11, you said, that you took on this role of comfort for her too, and almost like a surrogate partner, like somebody who's there for her as comfort. Yeah, I find this to be really common in the addiction field, that where the child ends up being like a surrogate partner to the parent who is either left or because of divorce or death. So I'm going to create other bubbles here, and I often will do this. I usually do it on the whiteboard while the client has their worksheet in their lap. And I tell them, I'll either give you multiple pages, or I'll just create your own bubbles and write them in. If that's what's happening for you, go ahead and keep creating them. I'm going to write caregiver. And I'm going to separate that just to see what happens when we do it. All this is an experiment anyway. I always tell my clients, everything I say in here is a hypothesis, so correct me at any point. And I invite you to do that too. But I'm going to put surrogate, partner or something. Is that how you would say it? Would you say it differently?
My experience of it is I became her husband. The word partner for
Okay.
that age.
Yeah.
Currently it makes sense, but at that age I just felt like...
Little husband. Like a little husband? Okay. See, and that's exactly why I check in, because everyone has their own idea of what the words mean. Words are special, and they use a certain word for a certain reason, and I started saying partner because I think I'm so used to being politically correct that I use that word a lot. But you felt like a little husband. Yeah, okay. Anyone else? Yes.
Don't talk about what goes on beyond closed doors. That's a big one. Not an infant, obviously, but...
Yes, yes. And I'm glad you clarified that point. The point was, the comment was, don't talk about what goes on in the family, right? Outside of closed doors, outside of the family. But you brought up a point that not as an infant, but you know this to be true as a young child, right? Yeah. And so think of yourself originally as an infant, use the stories you were told, the pictures, the photographs you had, things like that. But then also consider yourself growing up. Who did you need to be growing up as a young child? Who did you need to be as a preteen and a teenager? Because sometimes those roles kind of shift. Another way to ask the question is, what role did you take on in your family of origin? What role did you take on? So don't talk about
What goes on behind closed doors?
what goes on.
Which made me think everything that was going on was normal. Everyone was doing it.
So that made you think that whatever was going on was normal. Everyone was doing it. Right, okay. So, and I would say that's the experience of a lot of kids, because what else do you know? You only know your family, So often, even if there's a real problem with one of the caregivers, the kids tend to take that on. They tend to turn it in on themselves, right? And and assume that, well, this is normal, so therefore if I'm having big feelings about this, there must be something wrong with me. I don't know if that applies to your situation, but I'm just saying that often happens for people. I would say that as you develop, so first your caregivers are the most important connections you can make. But as you develop, your peers become really important, and even sometimes more important than the connections you make with your peers become more important than the connections you have with your caregivers in those teenage years, because you're neurobiologically you're getting ready to launch, right? So you need your peer group. If you think about it in sort of like tribal terms, we're tribal people, and we need this connection with our caregivers because of defenselessness and helplessness in infancy. But then as we get ready to leave our family, we've got to rely on our tribe. In tribal terms, we've got to know if we're the guy that sets the trap or signals that the woolly mammoth is coming, or runs in with a I don't know how they kill woolly mammoths, but runs in and makes the kill. You got to know who you are. Or are you the nurturer or caregiver, for the tribe? You've got to know what your position is. So at that point in our development, we've got to start attaching to our peers. So at that point, preteen, teen, the peers could be added. I would say you might want to consider what adaptations did you make in order to fit in with your peers. So does that bring up any new material for anybody? Yes.
Don't expect intimacy and don't trust it. In relationship, the relationship comes with a price.
Yes. Don't trust intimacy. Does that encapsulate it? No? Okay. Yes.
People pleaser.
Ah, yes, the people pleaser. I say that with great fondness and great familiarity. Yes, so often the people pleaser is up there. Yeah. Yes.
The fixer problem solver.
Ah, yes. Fixer. Problem solver. So we just added don't trust intimacy, people pleaser, and fixer, problem solver. Yes?
Say cheerleader.
Cheerleader.
And not the literal.
Yeah. And tell me, how did you cheerlead?
Well, I think it's part of being a people pleaser, just other focused and always, encouraging others and, really telling them they're great and focusing on their
Right.
achievements.
So encouraging others, focusing on other people's achievements, telling them they're great. Yeah. And I imagine at times at the detriment of your own.
Well, there wasn't
Just a
even,
guess.
there
What?
was no awareness of the
There's no
there was some
awareness.
other focus,
Right, right. And that's where we're going next. So anyone else have one that they want to share? Yes.
We might be moving to that, but since we're in the Center for Healthy Sex, I think I'll throw in, I needed to be straight.
You needed to be
I
straight.
needed to hide my same-sex, emerging same-sex attraction.
Yes. Be straight. Be heterosexual. Yes. Very, very common.
Self-deprecating.
Be self-deprecating. Mm-hmm. Rick, you had one?
Rage and volatility should be tolerated and not criticized.
Rage and volatility, you said, should be tolerated.
Or should be a normal part of a relationship.
Oh, I'm going to misspell something. I know it. Volatility.
You say rage equals normal.
Should. You said should be tolerated.
Or accepted in a relationship.
Okay. Yes.
Question, because what came up for me as were the opposite of what my parents, what I like
Yes.
understood. So it was challenge the norm.
Exactly.
Challenge your sexuality, challenge being messy.
Right.
It was, so I got those separate messages that also got built into, I imagine, my primary parts too. So conflicting. How does that?
Exactly. So it shows up as rebellion, and we can either rebel or nurture the parts that didn't get to be, and we're going to get to that. Okay. So remind me if I don't go back to it, will you? Okay. So are we okay to move on to the other side? So, so where I go with this then is we take a look at these things, and these are the items, these are the parts of personality that the client is really well identified with. They usually look at this and go, I almost always say, so is that pretty much you? And they're like, oh yeah, that's me. So then I say, well, something had to be disowned. If you had to make these adaptations to your family system, then something else had to be disowned. But before I leave the primary parts, I like to remind the client that these things, because I don't want them leaving them, hanging up here too long without reminding them, these are your survival skills. You had to do this. So sometimes it's secrets, avoidance, dissociate. Sometimes it's, you'll see, if we have time for it, I have a little slide later that shows an addict that I was working with and what showed up. And there's often a constellation that ends up being addiction, a constellation of these parts. And people can really go to shame when they see all this stuff up here. So it's really important at this point just to say, these were your survival skills. You didn't have a choice. This is what you had to do. And then we go over to disowned parts. So we say, so if you had to be all this, what didn't you get to be? What didn't get to be nurtured? Okay, so for each of these, I'm going to ask that question. I'm going to do it in black so it can be seen. I often will do it with a whole different color. So, self-reliant. What got disowned with the self-reliance?
Dependence? Or healthy dependence?
Is that right for you? Yeah? Healthy dependence. And if something else shows up, don't bother telling me. I'll be happy to, it's a wonderful thing about the whiteboard. We can always add something or take it away. Tactile. The tactile comfort. Can you identify something that got disowned?
Healthy sexual boundaries, actually.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. Healthy sexual boundaries got disowned because there was an emphasis on the tactile. Makes sense. Lost in chaos. What do you think got disowned? Because you were used to being lost in chaos.
What got disowned were, I think, my voice got disowned.
Your voice. Speaking up.
Yeah,
being seen. I'm going to probably write all of that there because it'd be meaningful for the client. So I'm going to say my voice. I added speaking up, and there was a pause, so I'm not 100% sure that's accurate, but being seen was what she came up with. Be quiet. What was be quiet?
Somebody back there I added on to it.
Yeah, I'm sorry, right. What got disowned? If you had to be quiet, what didn't you get to be? Self-expression and confidence got disowned. Okay, good girl.
Being curious and adventurous.
Curiosity and being curious and being adventurous got disowned. And in don't challenge the norm, what got disowned?
Finding myself.
finding myself got disowned.
And being comfortable if I fell out of the norm.
Comfort outside the norm also got disowned. Don't be messy. What got disowned with that?
Let's see. Spontaneity. Wow, this is like mind blowing. So great.
I know, and this is the kind of reaction that I usually get from clients too. It's like they like all of a sudden it makes sense, you know? Yeah. Don't cry.
Emotions are not okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, often not only expressing emotions, but even when you can't express your emotions fully, you lose the ability to even identify what you're feeling sometimes, right? And is that true for you?
Yeah.
So I would say identify and express. And I usually add that identify piece in there for whatever reason, because I've seen it happen so many times that over the course of working with somebody, they go, oh, I don't even know what I'm feeling. So I usually add that, but you kind of get to know that process as you go along.
And I would say it would be identify and express true feelings.
Ah.
My true feelings.
Okay, yeah.
So I certainly have feelings, but it's like the surface level stuff.
Identify and express my true feelings. Got disowned. If you had to excel.
I couldn't be ordinary.
Yeah. Ordinary or good enough.
Yeah,
Couldn't be ordinary.
almost sounds pejorative. I couldn't be authentic. I couldn't be who
Ah.
I was. I needed to be better than that.
Being authentic gets disowned. If you were social, if you had to be social, what got disowned?
Couldn't be an introvert.
And special?
I think it ties into
Yeah, I was wondering.
excelling, being authentic, being ordinary.
Okay. So we'll use ordinary up here. When I hear somebody say ordinary, I think good enough. But that might be my Brene Brown stuff, because, you know, a lot about shame is a lot about not feeling good enough. And
Being as I am.
as you are, yeah.
For example, I went to medical school and would have been, only in retrospect, I realized, would have been perfectly satisfied being a primary care physician. But I felt a burning need to be a specialist, and then more and more and more, even though my body told me, what am I doing? This is not me.
And that's where I would go with it. It was, what toll did that take on you? You know, that would open up a whole other mine of treasures for, you know, how often do you do that in other aspects of your life, and what kind of toll is that taking on you? And, you know, do you take on too much? Do you try to do too many things and then do you become exhausted? You know, that could take you down a whole other path. So these are going to be harder to trace what goes to what, but caregiver, what?
Being taken care of.
Often, yeah. I'm curious to know what
Needy.
I'm
Being
saying.
needy.
Being needy, yeah. So being needy, and I'll put down the others because I think a lot of people can relate to caregiver. Am I right? I see nodding heads. So often what gets disowned over here is being needy or self-care or asking for my needs to be met, that kind of thing. I'll just say asking for my needs. Little husband, what got disowned with that experience?
I think it goes back to a couple of things. Authenticity, being my own person. Having my own needs. Being her husband became about taking care of her needs.
course, yeah. And this is another one that I might spend a little time on that we won't spend here, but I might ask things like, did it feel like a burden to be the little husband? And were there ways in which you couldn't just play and be carefree with the kids, and were you tied to being home? Or I'd want to invest lots of things like that. So this would be a really rich one for discovering all that, and we won't do it here today, but if so, there might be things like carefree or play that got disowned as well. So I'll just write them in there just as a possibility. Don't talk about what goes on.
The truth.
The truth gets disowned. Yeah. I'll save that truth. Don't trust intimacy. What gets disowned?
Connection.
Yeah. Connection. Vulnerability could be a possibility. Intimacy is kind of an obvious opposite, right? Intimacy development, all that goes with that. That would be another really rich area. People pleaser.
Being honest with others, and being responsible to myself and others by telling them the truth.
I'm going to say responsible with the truth, just to shorten it, just for the purposes of this presentation, and honest with others. Great. Fixer, problem solver. Go ahead, fixer.
Yeah, I thought kind of like precious time with self. Because there's so much energy and focus looking at how to solve other people's problems, so I feel like I gave up just important self-awareness or time with self.
Special time with self, and I also like self-awareness because that's so important to good mental health. So I would include that one there too.
One other thing for the people pleaser
Yes.
is kind of loving my own self-image regardless of what others think of me.
Right.
So that drains so much energy.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So for the people pleaser, what gets disowned is loving your own self
At the cost of trying to get along with others.
at the cost of trying to get along with others.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, loving self at a cost of getting along with others. And cheerleader. Who's my cheerleader?
The need for and comfort with getting attention and support.
The need for and comfort with getting attention and support. Okay. Need for and comfort with,
Feeling comfortable.
yeah, feeling comfortable with getting support for yourself.
And attention.
And attention for yourself. Okay, yeah. Straight. If you had to be straight, if you had to be heterosexual, what got disowned?
Any expression of homosexuality, effeminateness, or anything that could be interpreted as effeminate. So flamboyancy, creativity.
So effeminate qualities, flamboyancy, you had to dumb it down or something, right? Dampen it,
Yes.
right? Okay. I'm going to probably misspell, but okay. And be self-deprecating.
Dignity.
Dignity. Okay. Did I get them all? No. Rage, volatility should be tolerated. If you had to adapt by believing that rage and volatility were to be tolerated, what got disowned? Assertiveness, okay. All right, so thank you for your participation so much. I appreciate that. It's wonderful. So what I remind people with at this point, I remind them that these were the survival skills. I almost always write them in a different color. so it stands out. There might be shame work to do around some of this stuff over here. And then what I point out, and this is almost always an aha moment, is that if you look over here, these qualities are excellent recovery skills. So I usually write, because I'm working with addicts mostly, I write recovery skills here. And let's just call them out here. See if these aren't some good recovery skills. Being okay to be ordinary or good enough. Expressing yourself as an introvert, solitude. Being authentic. Identifying and expressing my true feelings. Spontaneity. Finding myself. Comfort being outside the norm. Curiosity and the ability to be adventurous. Self-expression, confidence. My voice, speaking my voice. Being seen. Healthy sexual boundaries. Healthy dependence, interdependence maybe. Right? Being needy, self-care, asking for my needs to be met. Being my own person, carefree, playful. The truth. Connection and vulnerability. Being honest with others, responsible with the truth. Loving myself at the cost of getting along. That's boundaries too, right? Special time with self-awareness. The need for comfort and comfort, the need and comfort with getting support and attention, asking for help. Expression of homosexuality, being at peace with the femininity within oneself, the feminine parts, the flamboyance, having a healthy expression of homosexuality and dignity. If that's not a recovery list, I don't know what is. So the last little piece here is that there's this mindful awareness, this inner witness, and this goes back again to the voice dialogue work, that what you do in the room in voice dialogue is you speak to the one part and then you speak to the opposite part, and the person actually moves in the room to where that one part wants to be and where this other one, and they take on the posture of the one part and the posture of the other part. It's all very psychodrama, right? But then you have the client come back and reflect on the whole process and come back to center and to be able to kind of feel the sense of this one part and the sense of this other part, but in a centered way. So using that idea, and I love the idea of inner witness. One of the things I love about this exercise is it helps clients externalize. They no longer have to be fused with the people pleaser. They don't have to say, I am a people pleaser. They can start talking about it like, I have a people pleaser inside me. And I don't necessarily need to let that people pleaser speak right now. I might choose self-care, that kind of thing. So it helps externalize. But then this last piece is the idea that you can stand in the tension between the opposites within and feel the tension and feel the difference between how things go when I'm a people pleaser and how things go when I'm taking care of my own needs. And I can make a choice at any place along that spectrum. There might be times when it really serves me in my life to be a people pleaser, right? And there might be other times when it really doesn't serve me and it serves me to ask for my own needs to be met. So it brings to the client's awareness, to their consciousness, more of a conscious choice of where they're going to be on that spectrum, where they can choose in any moment. Like, we say in sex addiction treatment, every choice is either a choice towards recovery or a choice towards relapse. Every choice. And if you consider that, and you consider that you can make any choice to be somewhere on the spectrum between The things on this side and the things on that side. It really kind of brings the whole thing full circle, and it brings the unconscious material to the conscious. And that's pretty much the way that this exercise wraps up. I did want to get back to your question about what happens in teenage years when you decide, hey, wait a minute, my peers are all challenging the norm. I want to challenge the norm too. And typically that's what we call rebellion. Where is that one? It was this one. Don't challenge. I was finding myself. Okay. So through a process of rebellion, this is how I write it on the sheet. You nurtured that up. You found a way to speak up or to find yourself and be comfortable being outside. Like, I'm okay, I'm me. I get to be me. Sometimes it's less of a rebellion and more of a nurturing. So sometimes this, all right, nurtured, that you develop that skill. You can consciously develop any of these skills, which is the hopeful piece of this, is that you can develop any of these things over here and intentionally spend time in them. As a matter of fact, one thing that's really important to tell your clients is that these things will always feel like the default. They'll always feel like, oh, it's so easy for me to be a people pleaser. I say yes without even knowing that I've opened my mouth, But so these things are going to feel uncomfortable, and that's okay. That they are uncomfortable because they went against survival. And so practicing some of these things that are uncomfortable might actually be a really good use of your time, right? So I forgot to turn the machine back on. It's probably going to take a minute. Does anyone have questions so far?
When you're doing this with a client,
Mm-hmm.
how many sessions do you generally spend on this? And do you actually sit there and do what you did on the whiteboard? You hold a piece of paper and just one-on-one?
Yes. My whiteboard's about this big, so I put it up on its end on the easel. I do it on the whiteboard, and I give the client the worksheet that you have. And by the way, I will be happy, if you want to email me, I'll be happy to send you clear worksheets if you've written all over yours. Just, keep my name at the bottom of it so I get credit for it, because I did create this on my own. But use it as much as you like. It's my hope that you would. But I write it on the whiteboard. They write it on their sheet. Sometimes, and today, everyone's got a camera phone with them. So often they'll just take a picture of it. And you're welcome to do that if you want to do that here and capture this whole thing. We can do that afterwards. They'll capture it and go home and write it. And then that continues the processing. So they continue to, and that didn't go on, did it? Oh, it's because I pointed at the... So I may need Galen in here to help me get this on, but,
It's blinking.
5 minutes, okay. Well, it is blinking. That means it's going on?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Any other questions while we're waiting for the projector again? I have a few more slides to show you, and then we'll wrap up.
Do you have any clues as to how to start to practice this as the how?
Yeah, good question. How to start practicing this? And I'm not sure I quite fully answered your question previously about how long does it take. I will sometimes get it done in one 50-minute session. Sometimes we'll break it up into two. We'll do all the primaries one day, all the disowned another. And I continue to refer to it. So, your question again?
Do you have any framework for how to begin to
How to begin.
practice this?
I would jump right in. That's what I did. I would jump right in with the little sheet and just say, and on these slides, and it's in your handouts too, I've given you some hints for the kinds of questions you can ask, which actually we'll see in just a minute here. So just want to give you a little bit of a primer on some of these voice dialogue pieces. The primary parts are there to protect your vulnerability. They protected you at some point. They're necessary, right? They're not good or bad. They just were. They needed to be, okay? They were survival mechanisms. Here's the question for you. You can ask, who did you have to be to connect with your mom, your dad, whatever? What role did you take on in your family of origins? Another way. These are all getting at the same stuff, the primary parts. Okay, so that's in your handout. These are some possible parts. This is from a previous presentation I did on voice dialogue. They all say like the power broker, the philanthropist. I use the client's words rather than making it sound like a certain thing. That's a little more internal family systems. They have the firefighters and all that. They're very similar, by the way, IFS and voice dialogue. Disowned parts, neither bad nor good, just had to be, probably underdeveloped, more like shadow stuff. I have a picture of Hester Prynne from Scarlet Letter because that's the kind of stuff that gets disowned, is this stuff, you know, she took on a whole society's puritanical, you know, opinions about sex, right? But, you know, it is our shadow stuff. It's our underdeveloped stuff, the stuff we don't want to own, stuff we like to project onto others, that kind of thing. And here are some questions you can ask to get at the disowned parts, okay? What were you punished for in your family? In the voice dialogue technique, we identify and externalize the primary and disowned parts. You saw us do that today. And bringing the client to an awareness of the implicit stuff that's running the show, the unconscious material that's running the show. It helps them detach from old patterns, like the inner addict, and nurture new perspectives, like the inner sponsor. Okay, so here's an example of one that really turned out to be a cluster. This was an addict. A cluster of, you can see this is my messy writing, a cluster of selves that ended up really looking like his addiction. He was raised in a really religious household, and he used to fake speaking in tongues at church. So it's like fake at church, avoidant, dissociating, shut down. He became a slick liar. So these things can be shameful stuff, right? But so a lot of our work was about sort of normalizing that he had to do this in his family system. He had to. On the other hand, lots of great recovery skills over here: relaxation, expressing anger, fear, vulnerability, social with peers and wife, speaking up for needs, being disciplined, surrender, cutting losses and disconnecting, attuning to his own needs. The benefits of doing this are that it encourages self-exploration and enhances insight. Reduces shame and increases self-acceptance. Grows ego strength and promotes healthy boundaries. Enhances self-esteem and develops conscious choice. Isn't that a cute picture? This is just a little piece from something I heard recently on Psychology 2.0 about why clients transform in therapy. That you take the implicit and make it explicit. That you take the explicit conscious stuff and use it experientially, which we did today. That you take that experience and make it relational. That's the attachment theory piece of you know, how is it to tell me this today? How is it to sit with me and have me witness this? That kind of thing. And then you reflect on why it works, called meta-processing. I just thought that was interesting, so I threw it in. Ultimately, we want our clients to understand that they are a beautiful mosaic of all the parts of them, the parts they had to adapt and the parts that didn't get developed, that they are that whole person, and it's about really vitalizing and enlivening that whole person. Thank you.